Okay, here we go. Into the grinder!
Prince of Persia.
The after years.
What was once bright and shining, a pillar of gaming trademark, soon found itself caked with a layer of grime and relegated to bargain bins. And isn't that tragic? The Prince of Persia trilogy existed in a time before noise, before downloadable content, before games as service, before loot boxes, and yes, before NFTs. One sec. Sorry, the direness of reality compelled me. And it'd be easy to handwave the after years, prop up the trilogy as the only prince worth Persia-ing. No, I haven't had anyone edit my scripts. Why do you ask? It was never the same between the reboot, Forgotten Sands, a million games, Jesus! But everything post Two Thrones is interesting specifically because it all attempts to capture what made those older games good. We can trace a lineage like a finger through sand and make all kinds of uncharitable retrospective dunks on those poor developers. Actually, wait, I'm in Canada, and Ubisoft's in Canada. Oh no. Today we're looking back at the death of Prince of Persia proper, its last gasps and final triumphs. Here we go! What is this beautiful land? There's something compelling about reboots, and Prince of Persia 2008, like Sonic 06 and DMC Devil May Cry, makes an effort to be itself, but different, and it's hard to know why, as a fan, because the older games were fine, they were well made, well considered, they worked great, so why the change? Where's Prince of Persia the Four Towers? Prince 08's not some far-flung new concept for the series, more a hard swerve. You're still the prince, nameless. Okay, you're looking for Farah, your donkey. Guys, huge slam on Farah's legacy, and I'll have you know she was primarily known for showing feet, not ass. You meet up with a magical girl named Elika who needs some smelly burglar type to pummel her demon-tempted dad into submission. Else the lands will be cursed by Ahriman for all times. Game's fun enough. It's easy to assume that everything's about money. Because it is. The trilogy's games, outside of Sands of Time, did increasingly worse as the series continued, regardless of design, regardless of booba and six-pack, regardless of prowess or critical success. What's weird, then, about Prince 08 is that very little is changed to fit the AAA framework. Like, sure, there's major gameplay shakeups, but on the whole, it's still a 10 to 12 hour game. In a market full of players clamoring for longer experiences, the reboot only tacked on about 2 to 4 hours compared to the average trilogy game. It has some minor DLC, but nothing overlong. You get the sense it was supposed to be a full-blooded new take on the old hotness, but only pulled a collective, yeah, okay. And it's rough as a fan in particular because of what got dropped. There's no rewind power. The gameplay isn't a series of cropped stages. A significant amount of time is dedicated to collectibles. Combat is, whatever this is, it's weird. It's like this. The state of the world is now so grim that even my small town is rife with deeply pathologized individuals.
Okay, don't listen to that guy. I'm taking over this show. It's me. You, KBash.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Really weird. You're weird. It's weird that you're like that. Prince 08 is still useful to us as a window into the devs' thoughts on their own series, and a decent play in its own right. So we're gonna have to ask what the game's systems are and aren't to the Prince of Persia series writ large. See, Pop's based on 3 pillars of gameplay: platforming, puzzles, and combat, and that's all here. Narratively, the series relies on having a woman accompany the brooding, aloof, immature prince so that he learns from her, learns to care about something. It's a timeless kind of story. Extremely withered, but you can bet your ass it's back because it works. I think the chief distinction between Elika here and female companions of yore is that Elika only shows feet. Oh, twice in the video, huh? Good job, KBash. So let's start on the ground. Platforming is the essence of Pop, and in Prince 08, platforming's the world. The entire rendered area is laid out contiguously, designed to be platformed between throughout the game, including backtracking. It's designed with ease of use and expedience in mind. I really can't stress how big of a change this is. You're not going through the palace bathhouse level or whatever. The entire world is an active playground, like taking Warrior Within's design sensibilities and making it global. You do all kinds of wall running, sliding, pole hopping, canned animations, sometimes a little more restrictively than older entries, but on the other hand, you're bending perspective, defying gravity, flying through zones, experiencing these contained, fantastical moments the old tech could never allow. Don't worry about getting lost. There's a pathfinding wisp and fast travel. You're always safe. So it kept the clothes but went out to dinner. It's a massive shift in scope and creates the exact issues you would imagine. It's actually not all that fun, going through the same jungle gym back and forth 8 times. I mean, it can be on the first or second go, even the third to collect light seeds, and fourth for more light seeds. I said the game was open and contiguous, but really, certain paths only open once you've collected enough cum balls to gain a new magic platforming power, of which there are 4, so you can continue traversing the space. Like, the world only truly opens up once you've got all 4 powers and have largely completed the game, purifying most of the drab, Darksiders 3-ass zones into something visually palatable. Prince 08 relies heavily on visuals to reward constant traversal, and it's a beautiful setting, visually striking, masterful art direction I'll talk about later. Still stuck on 30 FPS anywhere but PC, though. To bridge the platforming and combat discussion, having a world laid out like this necessitates some kind of resistance apart from complexity. So, combat. Occasionally you'll be forced into a fight after landing on a platform against a pretty boring enemy.
Fuck you!
And they made the system work by rewarding a skilled player with a chance to snuff out the enemy before they materialize, but only if you're fast enough. And you do well to be fast because the combat's I mean, if platforming's Pop's essence, then combat's the must. Quick recap, Pop's combat's a little weird, kinda strange. But it's fun and quirky and pseudo-cinematic. Even considering change over change, combat was always enjoyable enough, and only got better. According to the devs, the intention with Prince 08's combat was to impart drama and importance to each battle. So every fight's a 1v1. Okay, no problem. I like a good fighter. Let's go. But you didn't take the rogue part out, right? I really liked ganking in the old days. Please. I described the system as choppy swashbuckling. None of it feels or even looks half as fluid as the games before, and, like Sands of Time, locks you to your opponent, hobbles the prince. It's a depressing change considering the freedoms and excesses of 2 and 3. The pole dancing, bro! That doesn't make it bad by design. You've got a number of options. Sword attack, Elika attack, dodge, block, parry. Sometimes you or your opponent get to interact with the stage. It's not awful, but it falls into repetition fast, mostly because it's Simon Says. Part of the problem is the drama component the devs pushed for. There are only 5 major enemies you'll fight throughout the game. Elika's father and 4 mini-bosses, each fought upwards of 3 to 5 times. The warrior, the hunter, the alchemist, and the concubine. 4 mini-bosses comprise 80 to 90% of the combat in-game and rule over 1 zone apiece. And they're not all that varied. Yeah, they each have quirks, behaviors, but by the time you get to their final battles, you'll know the fights front to back. You pick up real fast that the hunter parries you after so many sword slashes, that the alchemist will slough Elika off if you're not careful, that certain combos work better in certain situations, and it's not like the team threw up their hands and gave up. The alchemist is occasionally fought in an instant kill ring, so you gotta watch your feet. The concubine tends to knock Elika out at the start, and the warrior is a mini-boss mini-game where you've gotta lure him into destructible objects or knock him out of the ring.
Oh, ring out time!
But it's not nearly enough variation to support a full pillar of design for a whole game. Because no matter what good you see in this, it's not nearly as interesting as flying off walls. It's a direct step back to Sans, but arguably worse. And it sounds good on paper, sure, but it's not all that dramatic in practice. And that's mostly because the third pillar of gameplay exists. Not puzzles. Yeah, it's technically a pillar, but the 3-pillar structure isn't the best way to frame this paradigm. It's more like 2 pillars and some embellishments. They're there, they're inoffensive, that's it.
Call me the Scarecrow, because I'm like, if I only had a brain.
The real third pillar, in my mind, is companionship. A narrative thread spun up in Sans and continued throughout. Elika's a good piece of design, a good character. Everything you do in game, platforming, puzzles, combat, Elika's there to help, and you're there to carry her through her mission. It's such a simple thing, but so meaningful, easily the most impactful and interesting element at play. But, seeing as there's no Sans, no rewind or time powers in general, the game, to be Prince of Persia, needs something to err on the side of the player. That's Elika. She'll save you from falling in pitch. She'll save you from dying in combat. As far as I can tell, you can't die in Prince 08. at all. It's wild. And yeah, I've played Wario Land 3. I think removing death's a great accessibility option in general, but at what cost? Prince of Persia was never a hardcore, super difficult game. Half the challenge in the originals came from weird combat interactions. Just really stupid stuff. But rewinding time, what fans fell in love with was easygoing enough. It gave the player agency in saving themselves. It had a skill component. Timing was important. Prince 08 tips its hand in favor of the player, maybe too much. And sure, maybe it's a design consideration now that the world's open and connected. It definitely makes play smoother. Still, there's no point in designing for dramatic combat, to the death combat, when the stakes aren't death, but having to do the fight a little longer. I like easy games, but to strip away that very basic autonomy, even when it's narratively fulfilling, feels like a spiritual loss. And it's part of the broader aesthetic shift the game represents. Look, these smooth, cel-shaded visuals and simple but colorful character designs, the fantastical setting that leans infinitely more magical than the original trilogy ever did, the prince's generally upbeat dialogue, the pervasive hope that underpins all conversation, literally purifying the land so it sparkles and shines. This game is saccharine, and that's not a problem. It's an interesting design space to accompany the older trilogy, which made use of pseudo-realistic, fantastical yet grounded settings. It was dingier, grimier, grittier, bloodier. It was sometimes adolescent, but owned it. What I'm getting at is that Prince 08 does away with most of pop's idiosyncrasies. It's weirdness. Like, this video is gonna do worse than the first, and it's partly because these particular games aren't very funny or interesting. It might be fantastical, but with so little jank, edge, cringe, blood, it's become mainstream in a way you'd never expect for this series. Truly AAA. Even when the trilogy was aping from the Arabian Nights playbook and action movie tropes, it felt original. While Prince 08 looks original, it feels boilerplate. Okay, that was the hump. Now we can get dirty. Prince of Persia was a powerhouse franchise, at least if you take all the games published under that name into consideration. The number of phone games, handheld games, spin-offs is staggering. It is very much the precursor to Assassin's Creed and how that series was handled. Because as far as I can tell, none of it was terribly profitable, at least not compared to what AC pulled. And the great last chance for the series, the last fully 3D Prince of Persia game built on the design sensibilities of the Sands of Time trilogy, was aptly named Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands. That's funny. That's funny. Fuck you. Funny story, when this game came out, I thought it was a movie tie-in, like a bad licensed game. I know, stupid. It only superficially looks like the movie cover, but something was off about it. Turns out my instinct was right, but what I didn't expect was this fascinating pop microcosm, 2 games with the same name, one for the Wii. I feel like I'm looking at Dark Prince of Persia and not dark but definitely weird Prince of Persia. Speaking of which,
It's me, new KBash again. My biggest quirk is being quirkier than old KBash. I believe humanity is full of potential.
okay, it's enough! Just shut the hell up and leave my home.
It's me, risen once more from the depths of hell itself.
I can't do this. I can't tolerate these wacky side characters. What have I become?
Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands, Wii. This one was devved by Ubisoft Quebec and features a totally different story, setting, gameplay. I recorded all the games, found out this one existed after the fact, and had to rapidly run through it on a whim. It's not unknown to fans, but I mean, you ever heard of it? Presumably, Forgotten Sands, the real one, wouldn't have worked on Wii hardware and kept the same fidelity, vision, something, so we got this. And it's pretty cool, right? It follows Prince 08 in terms of fantastical aesthetics. Just looking at the art direction, it's winning this race anyway. And the prince is hotter than he's ever been. Sweet Mama Jama, look at this guy! Damn! Eyes like Elijah Wood, what the fuck? The story's a little weird, nothing to do with the game's prior, but it does have a genie companion. Someone in charge of the IP really believes in female companionship for this guy. Is that a staple? Do we really need players inserting themselves into the nameless prince and getting handed a girlfriend every game? Whatever. Mostly he goes around kissing statues.
God, I wish that were me.
Like before, there's 3 pillars of gameplay: combat, platforming, puzzles, and puzzles actually factor into the play, because platforming is puzzles now. Platforming is more or less like any other pop game. All the familiar actions are present. You're getting slapped with all the greats, and even the occasional 2D callback segment. It's a very familiar play, even when the controls are a little odd. I mean, it handles well, runs at a clean 60 FPS, unlike some games I know, and even holding a Wiimote throughout doesn't spoil the experience. I love delving into old Wii games specifically because they hold up a lot better in a lot of cases than I remember, and do a lot of interesting things you won't find in other consoles. Sure, waggling and other, quote, gimmicks can be frustrating or painful, especially to carpal tunnel folk, but the potential for innovative design expands massively.
Okay, you see that string? You see that jump marker? What's good, Sans Trilogy?
This game's selling point, and why I'm highlighting it at all, is the freeform platform play. You'll find a few magic powers and use the Wiimote to create pathways through levels in addition to the solid fundamentals inherent to the Prince of Persia lineage. Basically, you're handed the ring, the pillar, and the sphere throughout the game. One to create a handhold, one to reach new heights, and one to create jump opportunities. These are awesome because the devs expect certain lines of play, but an observant player can get around obstacles in unexpected ways by tapping into the mechanics. You're rewarded for understanding the rules of the systems at play, and that might not sound like much, but the game's inviting you, the player, to fuck with it, to break it. It goes beyond erring on the side of the player, to openly flirting with the player. It's genuine brilliance, and challenges the player in ways unseen prior. It creates a new context for difficulty without being outwardly hard. It turns platforming into puzzles. Does this have any right to be this good? I'm really feeling it! Now, while it innovates in platforming, all those magic abilities carry over to combat. So how's combat? Pretty f***ing bad, to be honest. Like, sure, none of the games are masterful or clean with their combat. It's either mildly janky or boring, and that's never changed. Same for this. Gets the job done, however. You got free feet again, but you're on the Wii. Sword slashes require waggling. You can use the pillar and ring in combat, even the sphere if you want to be weird, but it's unnecessary. The ring will freeze an enemy, and the pillar's kinda hard to aim, because you gotta aim at the ground in front of an enemy to knock them up, but you might slip and click, and it just doesn't feel all that good. But it doesn't matter, because 90% of the combat can be boiled down to running up the wall, waggling madly and flying at an enemy. Yeah, unlike older games, the wall screamer, or whatever you want to call it, does obscene damage, and it'll end annoying fights quickest, so just do it. Now, I have a knack for ruining combat in games that don't explicitly design for perfection, like Devil May Cry, but altogether it's a limp system and feels like dead weight on a hot air balloon. This game got gas. Don't hold it back. There's boss fights too, but I wouldn't call them incredible. There really aren't that many, and the ones that do exist get repeated multiple times in the same battle, or fought multiple times later for no real reason. Feels like padding. You expect an amount of that from anything AAA adjacent. What you gonna do? I guess it's worth mentioning that time, as pop players know it, is absent again. Instead, you're given a set number of tries based on how much sand you have, and when you're out, you get warped back to one of the many checkpoints. It's not awful. The focus is clearly on new powers, and they saturate enough of the gameplay you won't really miss time. The story simply is. I don't have a lot to say. The prince wishes for his own kingdom, gets roped into incredible hand and knee damage, statue boinking, and general genie jackassery. I think it's fine, but everybody say goodbye to the pretty prince. Goodbye! This is the last time you'll ever see the light of day! Farewell! Guys, you know you can play up the Persian heritage, yeah? His name ain't Steve, because he doesn't have a name. Forgotten Sands, the common one, or at least compared to its rarer cousin, is exactly that. Common. Shockingly so. It was released concurrently with the film, May 2010, alongside the Wii version, and the PSP version. Guys, for f***'s sake, I think they thought this was how to reclaim Prince of Persia's status, because at the time, while I was leaving high school, I thought pop was done being good. But suddenly forcing a glut of content for your IP is not handing fans a flaming hot Cheeto. It's throwing the bag in their face. The game takes place during the 7-year gap between Sans and Warrior Within. It plays almost identically to older entries, at least in terms of platforming. Yuri Lowenthal is back, and we won too. It's an obvious effort to take back the hill, pander to a core audience that is now either disinterested because multiplayer games or 40-hour time sinks are the wave, or feeling betrayed. And it's just too late. The prince is the prince, but I think he got married to success and stopped trying to impress. Time to drip up, bro. Show a little nip, okay? The story, for once, doesn't rely on female companionship. Like, yes, there's a supernatural element tied to a magical woman, but she doesn't do much on screen or assist you physically. The prince arrives in his brother's kingdom that's besieged by an army and eventually sand monsters. The story is real simple. Brother is exposed to magic, brother goes insane, beat the unholy shit out of brother. It doesn't make any attempt to be endearing. It doesn't do anything special. Your brother helps you out maybe once or twice before going fully evil. It's like I'm playing a really average action film. The good news is, like Forgotten Sands Wii, the platforming's pretty good. Even better than the older games because it directly lifts most of those tricks and smooths them out. You don't have to shuffle around a pillar you're clinging to. You can just input a jump immediately. It's a great addition and turns all the platforming into a super smooth experience. I have to be clear, at least one pillar of the core mechanics is good. Oh, and time's back, everyone! Time is back! They put the time back in! $1 million! Billion-dollar concept! Time's back, y'all! Even better, you pick up a number of magical powers, specifically the ability to turn water solid and toggle parts of the environment on and off. It successfully builds on old systems and adds new kinds of complexity, forcing the player to engage with sand powers and platforming in unison. Jump off frozen water, turn it off, and jump through a waterfall. It works. On those merits alone, the game's passable, and there are puzzles. They perform their function. Like, do puzzles really turn people on that much? Is the game gonna be that much worse without the Riddles 3? What's going on, huh? But speaking of spiritual death a la Prince 08, what the hell is this combat? Forgotten Sands devs conceptualized the game as a return to form with new tech building on past systems. The game runs on the Anvil engine, which is capable of maintaining about 50 bodies on screen at any given time without compromising performance, which is really useful for showing, rather than merely implying, that the siege referred to in-game is happening, and it means combat doesn't have to be a 1 versus 4-ish game anymore. If your first thought was, please tell me they didn't make 50 guys appear at any given time, yeah, basically. Modern Prince of Persia combat, trademark as envisioned by Ubisoft Montreal, is about spectacle, a hardware benchmark, rather than a freestyle swashbuckle. I really don't know what they were thinking. Yeah, pop lean cinematic, including in its combat, but was very much about leaping over enemies, staying active and agile, and beating out a plausible number of goons like a true Arabian Nights rogue type. Forgotten Sands is about battering down as many clumsy sand zombies as possible before you're overwhelmed. Throw in a few dodges and charge attacks. So I was saying the game is common. Oh, and the cherry on top, you have a skill tree now, complete with 4 elemental paths. Become an ice magic man, or a fire guy. This mostly means you'll pop your one big elemental magic in a fight and beat down slightly more sand zombies than you normally would. The magic isn't very impressive, or even fitting, like presuming that the 4 elements concept fits into the setting or even the narrative. How does it add to the prince meaningfully? He's always been a time guy. He uses time powers. Why slap the 4 elements trope on? What's roguelike about an ice wave coming out of your sword, or fire feet, or anything? It's so basic, so boilerplate. Why? I'm all for combat additions, but when you turn combat into a bad movie scene about killing the biggest number, rather than killing interestingly, when you tack on skill trees and make even that element the most, this is what's happening in gaming, right guys? Thing imaginable, rely on tired tropes, it's kinda pathetic. Like a game reviewer in 2022, still being incapable of writing skits and using evil reviewer alter egos.
I'm surrounded by manifestations of my own hubris, complacency, decadence. Why is brilliance so fleeting? Why is it so hard to capture twice? Do I even have the right to critique media?
Hold a moment, KBash, for I live yet.
Would you just die already?
Forgotten Sands has a lot of good ideas, and none of them appear in the combat. The one thing that arguably needs the most work. Because frankly, platforming was always solved. From the first Sands game, puzzles were never offensive. Combat's been the sore thumb. So they painted it white and said, good. F me. Just listening to the dev diary, you get the sense that epic is the word of the day here. Epic confrontations, epic proportions, epic numbers, and it's reflected visually too. Much of the game is cast in those austere, stoic stone tones. It's significantly darker than the previous 2 games, and you can see why, going back to the originals, but even they featured piles of greenery when they could. And Forgotten Sands is kinda barren. It's still full of fantastical images, some of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen in a video game. If only those moments lasted longer. It's easy to imagine a Sands of Time or Two Thrones done high fidelity looking at some of these. But yeah, aside from the platforming, story, combat, progression, puzzles, the narrative, it's all been there, done that. And for a game that quite literally carried the IP's torch, it's all too easily snuffed by the wave gaming rode into the 2010s. Occasionally, people question my methods and choices, like, what about this or that game? Why not cover Poop Farts of Mana, bro? Why not? And it's usually a spin-off, but I have to reiterate that I'm interested in a specific jumping point, Sands of Time in this case, and every other game in the same realm of design as it. So, 3D platforming Prince of Persia games. That said, Pop was milked to absolute shit. It's embarrassing. I look at what Assassin's Creed became and cringe, cause damn, at one point, almost yearly releases, piles of DLC and pre-order bonus crap, DRM, etc., just everything icky about modern AAA games. And all of that would have happened to Pop. Already was happening to Pop, only it died before that business really took off. Maybe fans were spared, maybe the universe is kind, because you can't take away the good that already exists. So let's look at the chaff. 2005, launching concurrently with Two Thrones. Really? Battles of Prince of Persia, effortlessly entering the top 3 ugliest DS strategy games. This is disgusting. Look, your units are like pieces on a game board, not even sprited chibis like Fire Emblem or something. We get it, the budget sucks, and you want a cheap cash in on nostalgia. Is this really the best foot forward? Funnily enough, it's meant to bridge part of the gap between Sands of Time and Warrior Within in the timeline. Did Forgotten Sands even need to happen with such a princely title occupying that lauded space? Everyone loves Battles of Prince of Persia. 2008, launching concurrently with Prince 08, we've got Prince of Persia, The Fallen King, another handheld 2D pop game made to cash in on the newly established universe in the main title. No Elika this time, just some weird Jack-of-Blades looking grouch. Looks decent, but people hated the controls. What you gonna do? Add to this an unholy hellswarm of screeching abominations straight from the depths of creative despair. So many games. Just so many games, and so few that knew what Pop was, why Sands was good, what worked going forward. And you can't blame anyone, because when good stuff bleeds money, good doesn't matter anymore. Studios' livelihoods rely on the success of their products, not the success of their art. That's Pop. The Sands of Time remake's just around the corner, and hey, they're remaking a classic. It's impossible to f*** up. Wait, delay till when? Pop fans stay winning, y'all. Regardless of everything I said, every game mentioned, from the original trilogy to Forgotten Sands, is acceptable, playable, decent. I think the first 3 games went through growing pains, but ultimately evolved in intelligent ways. And while some of those evolutions and insights were dropped, even forgotten as the games were made, there's still value, whether it's a warmer take on an old series, an innovative inquiry into gameplay mechanics, or facelifts and fidelity. Prince of Persia is solid. Its legacy worth respecting. Hey, it's KBash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons whose names are on the screen. The show's finally getting somewhere thanks to the community's generosity. And special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are... Adam Welsh, Acropolion, Alex, Andy Blarg, Arch, Axon 8, Basement Dweller, BZ Soul, Ben M, Bohop, Boom Dead, Brios, Cal, Can I Cuss on Captain here? Blasted, Captain Wave, Caesar T, Cordant, Christo, Cody Gold, Pouchmo, Corgi the Lad, Crater, CW Glassworks, Cynical, Daddy Dagoth, Dondium, Dakota Storm Jones, Jakey Stag, Swag, David Castillo, Dara, Decode, Dead, Dennis Amaya, Dr. Cullen PhD, Dylan Coffee, 8-Bit Funk, Elias, Elpio, Elsa, Aesthetico, Exa, Saiyan, Frankenstick, Frisky Nippler, Glyph Seeker, Guard Corey, Gucci Plant, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Archive, Beeman, Game and Station, X-Men, Horned Tiger.
Huey.
I'm supporting KBash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Ingenious Clown. I punched a sandwich. Irradiated cherries. Dice Kyle. It's time to sue. It's not good. Ivy Ruth Langley. Jacob. James. Jason Lasky. Jaden. Jadeus. Joke Fraud. Jordan Joyner. Keegan Too Cool. Clock. Critic. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Ice. Lady Dentalian. Latrix. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Juan. Low Fat Moger. Lucas Boyd. Lucky McSmucky. Magical Madman. Mama Rollin. Marcules. Maximilian Wolfgang Niver. Mike DeVere. Milky Moo Official. Monochrome Only. Mr. Dodongo. Nyrenew. Pedo Torpedo. Norian. Daridius. Old Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Only LK. The Plant. Pandemic Cowboy. Pinata. PK Gaming. Potato Gaming HD. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Quinn. Reasonable Willow. Reggie Rodriguez. Sagitrash. Siren Smells Good. Salty Smasher. Sam Vertigo. Scribe Slendy. Sakai no Award. Shot. Silver Bear 909. Soon. God! Sleepy Wabbit. Suckdolager. Space Lizard. Spooky Grimalkin. Squishword. Starbound. Storm Strider. Sublime Cataclysm. Super Sandwich Guy. George Chubbington. The Big Bubby. The Salt Knight. Thick Dick Mystic. Thrips Heartthrob. Timid the Writer. Travis Edwards. Twiddle Chungus. Vid. Valenrist. Venom. Vice Pup. Viewers Like You. Vic. Waposa. Weed Trash. Well shit. Wayland. Where am I? Help! Winter Solstice. Zanny Tanner. Yeet Kundo. You poison or you poison. Zachary Livesey. Zachary V. Zane the Impure. Zane the Pure. Zeradak. Zed Slayer Gamer. Zero Zalazar. Sylvan Ray. Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got all kinds of goals and lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. KBash out.